Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero, the show that revolutionizes personal engagement in the world and fortification of your life. Let's get to it. We're brought to you by Fox & Sons, foxandsons.com, the best place to get your BBC. I never start my day with anything less than BBC in my mouth, and I suggest if you like BBC, you go to foxandsons.com, get that big bold coffee, and put it in your mouth. foxandsons.com, promo code 0 at checkout for 18% off on any order $25 or more. That's foxandsons.com for that BBC big bold coffee. Put it in your mouth, baby. And the Marc Clair Show. If you enjoyed Marc Clair with Lions of Liberty, you're going to really dig the Marc Clair Show. Marc Clair has gone beyond the realm of politics to dig into the esoteric meaning of life in all sorts of different avenues, whether it be entrepreneurship, ghosts, goblins, Bigfoot, demonic entities, religion. Marc Clair is diving into all of it, and he's not afraid to tackle any task. So go check out the Marc Clair Show. Thank you, as always, Tom Burton, for the music. And you can find this show and many more at the Libertarian Institute.org. That's the Libertarianinstitute.org. That's where you'll find me, Patrick McFarlane, Scott Horton, Keith Knight, Will Porter, Kyle Anzalone, and a host of other writers like Kim Robinson. Go to libertarianinstitute.org and keep track of everything that we are doing for you. We are rolling. There's the record. All right. I am here with Miss Julie Mastrine. How are you doing, ma'am?
I'm doing well. How are you, Tommy?
I'm doing well. Just got off work, drinking beer. I was listening to UFC podcast to clear my mind. So
I'm not even going to tell you what type of media I use to clear my mind. It's terrible.
Oh,
I read like celebrity gossip, like just mindless, like this actor is doing this movie.
TMZ.
Dating me. Not TMZ, but I'm just like total mindless crap. I'm like, what are the celebrities up to? And there's all kinds of terrible satanic stuff in there, but
I feel you. But Nate Diaz just got in a street fight the other day, and I got to find out if they're going to press charges or not. So he was like, "Hey, So we've been kind of chatting back and forth. I saw you on Kyle Matovic's show, and then I've seen you on Counterflow a couple of times. Your conversation with Matt and Buck was really great. It was really good. Matt is one of those guys that every time I listen to him, I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? I got to listen a couple of times. Like, it's like, hold on. You slow down for me, brother.
He's so smart. I was like, I have no business being next to this person on this show.
He's Matt, like really but he's smart. Such a nice guy too. So,
oh yeah, he's great. He's smart.
But you have an interesting, as far from my perspective, you have kind of an interesting projection into orthodoxy, number one, but also through the libertarian part of politics, because I guess it's interesting to me and Buck and Matt because it's completely like opposite of the way we entered the political sphere. So talk about your projection into the political sphere, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, it really started back when I was entering college, and I was very radicalized by student debt. And I was just like, why is the system this way? Our economic system's unfair, etc. Lots of young people go through this. And all of the influences on my college campus were super socialist, feminist, left-wing, just a left-wing bubble. So I really got into politics from the far left, actually, and just like rejecting everything that I had been raised under, right? Like the economic system, the moral traditions, like all of it. I just started rejecting all of it because I felt like things were unfair. And student debt is a total racket. So like, I get it, and I was young and stupid and I didn't really understand like what was going on there. Now I think that government backed student loans are what's inflating the price, but that's a different thing. But that's what radicalized me. And then I was like reading a lot of feminist stuff online. So I was like involved in like the Democratic Socialists of America in college. They're really left wing. And then a libertarian showed up to one of the meetings and started debating the professor. And I was like, that guy sounds really smart. What's he saying? I don't even understand what he's saying. So then I started having this curiosity about libertarianism and knew some people who were libertarians and started talking to them, and they'd send me books. And like at that point, I was like, oh, I think I'm a libertarian. Like actually a market-based system makes sense. And, kind of got into that, but retained the left-wing ideas I had about the social order. And so then I became a professional left-wing activist in San Francisco. That is a real thing. A company that is, focused
owned by
on
George Soros.
yeah, focused on liberal. It's like all the institutions he funds were funding us, right? It's this whole funnel, and we were focused on left-wing activism. And I was the PR rep, and I would always think, okay, what if a conservative reporter calls me? Like, what questions would he ask? And so I'd sit down, and I wanted to do my job well. So I would think about the campaign from another angle. And then that thought exercise started getting me going, actually, there's some holes in our logic, right? And I started to like think from the other side, and that really helped. And then there were things going on in the culture that were kind of waking me up to what a racket left-wing politics were. Like the Me Too movement happened, and then like, I don't know if you remember this, but James Damore with the Google memo.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So that happened, and I was in the Bay Area, and I was like, why is everybody calling this guy a sexist jerk? Like his memo didn't say anything that bad, So stuff like that was happening, and I was experiencing things in my personal life that were making me go, I think everything I believe is untrue. Just a lot was happening. And that's how I started to kind of go to the other side and kind of, let go of my left-wing beliefs, and kind of realizing also that the media was super biased. They weren't telling the truth. They had an agenda. They were, not interested in the traditional, in traditional journalism. They were activists. All this stuff was kind of like breaking down my whole world. And I started to just kind of flip everything I thought I knew on its head. And I guess that's kind of the short version. But yeah, a lot of stuff happened leading up to that. And then, the way that I came back to Christianity is all tied up in that. My political and spiritual journey were like very intertwined.
Right.
Very intertwined, which I'm sure you understand.
Yeah. I always, my wife is still considers herself atheist, and she still like racks her brain. She's like, I don't understand how you got here. And I was like, reading politics.
Yeah, I know. That's it. Yeah.
The weirdest thing. I know it's hard to explain. It's like when I did a episode a while back where Matt had me on his podcast, and he was asking me about ESG. And so we're talking about this. And so he's like, so how did you end up Orthodox? And I was like, H.G. Wells. It's like, it doesn't make sense, but it was what spoke to me. It was like, oh, I see all these connections now that I didn't see before.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's like that. It's just this weird light. It clicks on and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. And, I'm still pretty new into Orthodox faith, and I'm still struggling with things, and I still have like issues, there are some weeks where I'm like not orthodox, like, but it's just the way it goes. And it's just part of the process of growing, it's growing pains. It's not comfortable. It's very uncomfortable. I want to ask you a question though, because I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet. Like we will maybe on another podcast, but I want to kind of stick to the point here. There was, so you were involved with the left when the anti-corporate left became the corporate left. So you saw that switch. How did that feel within?
That's a good question. So whenever I was on the left in college, it was all Occupy Wall Street, right? It was all like, we didn't trust corporations. We didn't like corporations, all of this. And then, gosh, it's like it happened both gradually and suddenly that I started to realize that the left had become the establishment.
So many things.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of what it even would have been like. I mean, I guess one part of it was seeing all the money behind left-wing activism. That was part of it, that it was like institutionalized and well-funded. And in a way, there's something almost like admirable about that, because if the right could like organize and be well-funded in that way, like maybe that things would be better. I don't know. But there was a sort of like disingenuous aspect to it though, because we weren't being honest about what the truth was. And then we were crafting advocacy campaigns around what would like get us attention and clicks and make us money, right? Especially in the digital media space, you want to trip people's emotions and create that. It was an outrage machine. We would inflate stories and blow them out of proportion and hide details or distort details to make it seem like a more terrible story than it was. And then we would send that out into the world and we'd get press coverage and we'd get people coming to the website and then we'd profit, right? So it was like being a part of that machine. It literally is an outrage machine. And this was pre-cancel culture being the mainstream. We were laying the groundwork for cancel culture because there was my organization and all these other organizations would like find something, some county commissioner in who knows where, Kansas, said something on her Facebook and we're going to go after her with a petition campaign and get her fired, right? So it was like that before cancel culture was even a term in the public lexicon, these organizations were laying the groundwork for it for years. And it was corporatized and it was monetized. And this is something I think people still don't understand about cancel culture, is that it's monetized. It's like, So that's, and then, marry that with the press, the corporate press. I started to realize that these journalists were not asking me any difficult questions. They didn't care about the integrity of our campaigns. They already agreed with us. And they were going to write a fluff piece and they were going to write something positive. And they weren't going to ask me any difficult questions. They never asked me anything difficult. And then they weren't doing their job. And then I was sitting there from my computer in a corporate tower in San Francisco, looking into some of these claims people were making, especially during like the Me Too movement really sticks out in my brain, but there were a lot of things. Claims people were making that were just like going viral or being like repeated by the press, that when you'd look into it, there were like details that would kind of poke holes in it and poke holes in the narrative. And I was like, well, why aren't we talking about that aspect? Or that's hearsay, that hasn't been like substantiated, right? And just like the journalistic standards have just tanked, and it's all feeding this liberal activism machine. Right? It all goes together.
The one that comes to mind immediately in my head is hands up, don't shoot.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you look into it, it was even the Obama Attorney General Holder found that was just all a lie. But you will still hear people today utilize that as a talking point.
Yep.
And it's like, wait, are we living on a different planet? Or is this intentional? And it's like this constant gaslighting that's fed to us. Whereas you can find the truth, and once you find the truth, you look at all the narratives around you, and you realize nobody is telling you the truth. They all want you to believe a lie.
Yeah, and the weird thing about it, and the whole like apparatus around the BLM movement is a great example of all of this, because they'll hide details. And I was just reading something today about I don't remember what state it was in, but a black man came to someone's door who was at the wrong house, and a white man shot him. And the detail that keeps being omitted is that this white guy was like 85 years old and scared because someone was trying to get into his house, right? And but they don't tell you that you know, he told police he was scared and thought someone was breaking in, right? So like when you know that detail, it's like, well, maybe it was an honest mistake. You can kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. He's not some like, you know, murderer, right? Like it's a terrible thing to happen, but to spin it as this like racism narrative is like, just you're being dishonest. And so then I've talked to people about this where it's like, are people being willfully dishonest? Do they know the truth? And then they're like, you know, making a choice to distort it, or do they just genuinely not know? And I would say that like from me being on the left and being involved with people on the left, and maybe I don't know if this is like too charitable or what, because I've had debates with this about people, but my experience seemed to be that people were simply not interested in the truth. And if you asked questions, they didn't care. So it was more this like subconscious desire to block out information that would break down their whole worldview. And I say subconscious purposefully. Like, I don't think a lot of these people want to know the truth because of what it would cost them. And it's all subconscious. They're not consciously thinking, I don't want to know the truth because it would require me to change my life. It's just subconscious. They're just
dissonance.
Yeah. They'll just block it out. They'll block out questions you ask. They'll block out information. The journalist that wrote that piece that I just mentioned, where it said about the black man who was shot, and they didn't include the detail that the old man was super old and said that he was scared. I bet the journalist didn't even allow that piece of information to like enter their consciousness. They like subconsciously block it out because it would like break down the narrative, and the narrative's too convenient. And so I don't know. I think that's kind of I think that's a large part of what's happening, but we could talk about if there's like higher levels to it where people know what they're doing and have an agenda.
I'm sure there are some people, but there are a lot of, as Stalin said, there are a lot of useful idiots, right?
Yeah.
And they're going to use those people. And it sounds to me like you found yourself in a situation where you recognize that you were just being a useful idiot, and you're like, I'm not going to be that. Like, I want to know the truth, and the truth matters.
Yeah. And the crazy thing about it is, since I was the PR representative, I was writing press release for these left-wing campaigns, and I could write them so fast because it was propaganda, because it was like you just plugged in certain buzzwords, right? And then you could craft it real quick and send it out. So it was like I could just be this like propaganda machine, and I've totally repented for this. And I've tried to create much more content that is not full of lies. To make up for it, but you don't have to think. Like, to create the propaganda, you don't have to think, because you know the narrative, you know the buzzwords, you know like exactly what you're supposed to say and exactly the take you're supposed to have on it. You don't have to think. It's like mindless. You can just pump it out. And so when I think about what's happening, when I think about the media, like that's what's like, people are so programmed not to apply their critical thought and to just repeat. I mean, think about our school system. Like, you're just taught to ingest and repeat. That's what you're taught to do for the entirety of your like school-aged life. Right. That's what you're taught to do. And so then you get into the workforce and you're like doing the exact same thing. You're ingesting a narrative and just spitting it back out, and you don't have to think. So once you start applying critical thought, then things start to break down, and you can't move forward. I had to leave this job. I had to walk away from a lot of money, and because it wasn't the truth. But most people aren't willing to like apply their critical thinking skills, and their money, their livelihood's all tied up in it. I see this with libertarians a lot too, I think.
Yeah, I can agree with that. But what I keep coming back to in my mind is, I'm wondering, like, was there a moment where you realized that yesterday I was anti-corporation, and today all the corporations are on my side?
I don't know. That's a good question. Like, I started to notice that they were all in lockstep with what they were. Yeah, it'd be really hard to pinpoint like an exact moment, but I did start to notice that they would all, first of all, they would they were commentating on social issues in ways that companies have never done in the past and wouldn't do,
Yes.
which is just ridiculous and unnecessary. So
I always
that was
think back.
happening.
I don't know. I don't know if you probably don't remember this, but there was back in the 90s. There was an issue with Nike. Somebody had been wearing Nike or something like that, and somebody asked Michael Jordan about it, and he's like, "Conservatives buy sneakers too. Like, I'm not stepping on the people that pay my bills." You know, that was kind of
Yeah.
like the whole thought process. So this whole me being a child, a kid, a teenager in the 90s, looking from 2023, I'm like, what the hell is going, like, these
Oh
people don't
yeah.
care, you know?
Yeah. And it started, and it's like hard to say where it all like got, where it all started to get really in your face. Like obviously now we're at a point where it's just saturated, right? The
Mm,
corporate culture is saturated with social justice ad campaigns and this and that's all politicized, and it's totalizing, which is terrible. And it's totalizing, which then creates a problem for people like you and me or whoever's an employee, because then you feel like you can't say what you think, because if you're out of lockstep with the corporate socio-political messaging, then you're not safe, right?
right.
So but it's hard to say when, like, how did I start to notice it? Like, I don't, it's a good question. There was a Twitter account. They were banned until Elon Musk bought it. They were banned for a while, called Woke Capital, or is that right? Woke Capital. And they would just tweet out like examples of all the corporations just being in unison with their like left-wing perspectives and advertising campaigns and everything. And that was, I think, a big red pill for me, where I was like, oh, whoa, this is everywhere. You know, because I'd been in the San Francisco bubble. So I was like, surely this is just San Francisco. But then like I get out of it and I'm like, oh no, this is totally everywhere, you know. And then it only got worse and worse.
Yeah, it's constant. And this is where it ties into ESG, because now they're using these metrics to measure how woke, basically, I mean, there's no other way of saying it, but how woke corporations and industry is. And what they're doing is they're utilizing, instead of utilizing the government to force and manipulate, what they're doing is they're using the financial markets. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, if your ESG score isn't high enough, then it's bad for the stakeholders of the area. And therefore, even though your credit score may be high, your social credit score or your ESG score is low, and therefore you don't qualify for all the loans and all the funding, all the finances. So that what they've essentially done is, through the billionaire class, is they've tied the woke agenda to the financial capital, and not through markets, not through the customers or those that require the services, but through those that are funding through loans and payment programs and advertising into the services. When I look at like what happened, just happened with Tucker Carlson, right? You know, a lot of my friends are tweeting at me on Twitter and say, okay, you were right about this whole ESG thing. You've been locked into it since 2019. Like, the things you're saying are coming to fruition. And it's like, yeah, because they don't care about the customer, right? The customer, the person that is intaking this information is not the purchaser. You get Fox News and these news services basically for free, which makes you the product. You are being sold by the news agency to the financial markets. So when Tucker Carlson came out last week and he had RFK Jr. on his show, and he starts questioning Big Pharma, who then is financing 70% of Fox News. It's like, yeah, no shit. They don't
Yeah.
want that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, because Fox News is going to choose that money coming in from the pharmaceutical companies, Moderna and Pfizer, over Tucker Carlson, who brings in 4.4 million eyes every night, right? They're like, we can replace the eyes. We can't replace the
Capital.
corporate structure that's behind us.
Right.
And so this is why you see such a rise in independent media with people like Megyn Kelly and Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, these people. Yeah, sure. I'm sure they had scandals. People are flawed. People do things. I mean, I have a history. If you drug up all my past, it wouldn't look pretty on paper anyway.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like, okay, yeah, there's that. But then there's also like this corporate structure is threatening to completely decimate your programming. And now you have people that are saying, okay, if we have to compete with the corporate structure, how do we do that? And we do that through the funding, through Substack and through these paywalls. And, you know, you get a Glenn Greenwald, you get your Jimmy Dores, Aaron Mate's, the Gray Zone. You can think whatever you think about them as activists or journalists or their political opinions, but they actually have the right idea. They were able to take these ideas that Chomsky taught about what the media apparatus was, apply it to themselves and create their own things. And so now you see a lot of the rumination on the right doing the same thing with the Blaze, the Daily Wire, and these things. Now, I mean, if you ask me, it's just evidence that the right has more money than the left whenever you're looking just from a grassroots level.
Oh, interesting.
Because you see the Gray Zone and Jimmy Dore and these people only hit such status, whereas the Daily Wire and the Blaze and some of these guys, they kind of shoot up. So without the corporate backing, the right is going to defeat the left. The left requires the corporate backing, and that's why they took the turn back in the day to grab on with the Clintons and all those people. They took that opportunity to grip on to those corporations and to begin to shape the corporate narratives.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It seems like the right is more popular than the left. Like if you just look at your numbers, like even like, you know,
I would actually like just correct that slightly and say that the right's not more popular. The right is a little older.
Yeah.
And with age comes more income.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's
because you have more skill,
obviously
more
the right
experience.
is not popular right now.
Yeah.
But you do have like, I mean, just the fact that Tucker was the number one show on cable, right? It wasn't just Fox, like he was the top at Fox. Didn't he have more viewers than any of the competing networks?
I think it was then both MSNBC and CNN combined.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah,
it was something like 4.5 million a night.
Yeah,
it was up there.
It's not, so in a way, I guess it's not like, I mean, unless people were like hate watching him or something, which I kind of doubt, but maybe it's like what he was saying was resonating or hitting or, so to speak, popular, right? Like people liked him. Of course, the left hates him, but he had a huge base. And
I don't use the corporate structure as a way to measure this, and there's a reason I don't. All right, attention is a currency. Right. And so if Tucker Carlson, let's say he's getting 6 million 50-year-olds to watch him every night, the pharmaceutical industries are going to dump a bunch of money into his program because then that's 6 million people seeing their advertising. The reason I pull it away from the corporate structure and I look at the Gray Zone on the left and the Daily Wire or the Blaze on the right is because all this funding that's going to those organizations, at least most of it, is grassroots. It's the independent, like, paywall you're buying into watching this product, right? And
Right.
so what I'm seeing is that there's more money on the individual level on the right than there is on the left, because the left is typically younger. It's a younger generation, right? So what do? They have these Zoomer revolutions where they burn Chicago. You see what I'm saying? What does the right do? They dump money into campaigns.
Right. And even
so,
that's like a known fact too, that people are more liberal when they're young, and as they age, I'm the same way. They become conservative, right? You just need life experience and to understand things that seem ridiculous when you're young. You just don't have enough life experience to understand why someone would hold that view, and then you wise up. But you're right. It's interesting to think, like, the example that I always think of as far as the corporations no longer like serving the customer, but using the customer as a product, is like when Gillette came out. I think this was one of the early things where I was like, what is happening? Where Gillette came out with a razor ad for men, and it was basically just saying that normal male behaviors are like pathological, or like, and it was like all normal male behaviors, and they framed it all as
I don't buy Gillette if you can't tell.
That's funny. Yeah, we can tell. But and they were like insulting their customer base. And then it was like, I don't know, no penalty for it. Or I don't know if people tried to boycott or whatever. I wonder though, like, but everything you just said makes sense.
When you saw what happened, when probably 6 months after that, right? Harry's Razors, which had been advertising on libertarian podcasts, conservative shows all over the place.
Yeah.
Suddenly started demonizing conservatives. And what happened? Jeremy Boring, the CEO of Daily Wire, came out with Jeremy's Razors. He's like, all right, fine. We'll just create a competition against you. If you're going to demonize us, we're going to drop you as a sponsor, as an advertiser, and we'll create our own. And they've done that with like all kinds of things. They've come up with their own chocolates and stuff like that. It's just insane, the things that the conservative media are coming up with to do. They're like, if a corporation comes out and demonizes the conservative way of life, we're going to come up with a product to compete against their product, and we're going to prove them wrong. Vivek Ramaswamy did this, and he's competing with BlackRock with a company called Strive, right? And so what he's done is he said, okay, if you go look at 401ks, it's one of the biggest scams in the world. The majority of all of the investment goes through BlackRock. Okay. Well, BlackRock is right in there with the ESG. BlackRock and Vanguard, they have been right there driving this whole minutia since the get-go. So what did Vivek do? He said, we'll compete with them, and we won't invest your money in woke companies. The reason that woke corporations are getting more investments is because you're putting your money into a 401k, not paying attention to who's investing it and where they're investing it. And they're taking your money and they're investing it into these woke corporations, and they're acting against your interest, which is not only making your life more difficult, it's also making your life more expensive.
So, yeah, I had like, when I first started investing in a 401k, I had that thought. I was like, but wait a minute, do I like these? Like when you invest in like a fund, right? And it's just the, top companies in the United States you're investing in. I'm like, well, I'm giving them money, and like, I don't have time to vet all these, or like, do I actually support them? Right. Mm-hmm. And I don't have time to look into it all. Do I want to like manage my own portfolio? Whatever it is. Right.
I always say not everybody's as anal retentive as my dad.
Yeah.
He's moving things around and messing with stuff. Like, but my mom doesn't do that. She has a 401k too. She didn't do that. I don't even invest in a 401k. My company invests for me. Like,
Yeah.
I haven't even like put any amount of money towards that. They just give me it, right?
Yeah.
Like a profit sharing plan.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent me a statement the other day. I looked at it. Everything was BlackRock. Everything.
Really?
Everything. I was like, if this were my money, which it isn't, it's their money that they are investing for on my behalf. I was like, if this were my money, I would be on the phone with them in a second, be like, no, move my money here, move it. You know, I mean, I dropped my Capital One account. I moved to a credit union and stuff like that. You know, so I'm like, whatever, man. Like, I'll fight you. Like, it might cost me something in the short term, but in the long term, it's not costing me anything.
So here's a question. You were talking about how when the right goes off and they leave the corporate entities, and we've seen so many journalists do this, like start a Substack or start independent media. You still, like, something that concerns me is like still at the core or like the base of it all are companies facilitating transactions. Like you need Stripe or PayPal or Substack. They're a little different, but because they integrate Stripe, right? But you need to still be betting that these companies aren't going to like shut you off because you're right wing if you're like have Stripe integration for your Substack, right? Like we're like betting that Stripe won't go woke or something, right?
But I mean, they already shut off Alex Jones, so.
Right? And like, and then and all these banks, even like, I don't know, like you had Wells Fargo shut off Lauren Witzke's account, I think. Stuff like that. Like it's like happening like here and there, and with, you know, not on a level to be concerned about because these are kind of like people on the fringes, so to speak. But even as conservatives move into like more independent media and like try to develop their own, like you can't I don't know. It's like, are you concerned at all about like the level of reliance that conservatives still need to have on like payment processors and these companies hosting sites, right?
Rumble started their own payment processor. It's called Parallel Economy. You can.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
Yes, you can use that. You can go to Parallel Economy and set yourself up a payment processing situation.
Yeah, it's like similar. It's like how on Twitter, like people would spend years like building a following, right, and then just get nuked, right? And it's like you don't really own your stuff, but the amount of like work that it takes to really own your stuff and like protect yourself from all of that, it's like, I mean, maybe it's silly, but it's like a ton of work and resources that you need to even like set yourself up to be like uncancelable or whatever it is. And
it takes a lot of attention. And I mean, like, I'm lazy. I didn't start my podcast like to make a bunch of money. I thought, maybe I can, like, you know, subsidize my income at some point, but you know, 5-10 years, whatever, like maybe it's possible. But I started my podcast to leave kind of a record of my thoughts and my interactions and my views on the world for my children, so that they can get back in touch with at a later age and go, oh shit, my dad was talking about this, my dad was talking about that, like this is interesting shit, you know. And so that was kind of like my whole like goal behind the podcast. So I never did it for the money, but there are ways that you can set up. I mean, I know Ryan Dawson has made a living out of working around all this shit, because he's been canceled from everything, you know, and he's helped other friends of mine like Pete Quinones. I also know, like I said, Rumble started a payment processor called Parallel Economy that you can go use. I know there's Subscribestar. I know that there's I can't think of the name of the website that Dave Rubin started. And
Locals, right?
Locals, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, you know what's interesting though is like, okay, here's what's interesting about this though. You still have to trust that on a long enough timeline, these companies aren't going to go woke, because and maybe they won't, you know, if you keep the right leadership and the right structure and hiring decisions are kept tight, right? But we've seen companies or nonprofits that used to have ideological integrity be totally corrupted, and now they're just a shell of what they once were. Like the ACLU is a good example, right? I mean, I don't know how much it's like I changed versus they changed, but I think they've changed. They used to be very like, constitutionally focused, and now they're very now they're like twisting it to make it woke.
Back in the 90s, they defended Nazis marching through a town of like majority Jewish people. Like,
they would never now. They would never. And they're like twisting their. So what starts to happen, this is what I've noticed in corporate America through my 10 years in it, right? Is like you have a company that's set up, or, well, this actually applies to America and the Constitution in general, but you have, let's say, a company that's set up with a certain mission statement or principles in mind. And it's like, we're about civil liberties or this or that. But then, like, you have all these young people moving through the universities that are indoctrinating them into leftism. They get into these organizations when they graduate, and then they start to bend and twist the meaning of what used to have integrity and a firm foundation, and it becomes woke. And I've seen this happen with so many companies where they just like aren't what they used to be. And it's interesting how like easy it is for people to take something and like twist the meaning of it and be like, oh, that actually means this, so we're gonna do this other like anyway, it's like corporate communism, I think, is like what we have, where like you take I mean, I think that's really what's going on, and the corporations are being used as like the foot soldiers for communist ends or something. But a lot of that is achieved by taking the mission statement and principles and values of a corporation or institution that once had integrity, and then twisting the meaning of it. And so, again, it's like a lot of these organizations are like explicitly set up to be a vanguard against this stuff. Like maybe they're safe. I just wonder about on a long enough timeline, because it's like if you make like a couple bad hiring decisions or whatever, or you're not like really firm against, or maybe you get a CEO in who like doesn't
look at Bud Light right now.
Yeah, like it's just everything's so precarious. And I mean, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try and set up these like anti-fragile companies that like hold to their principles.
I think what you're doing whenever you're setting up these financial institutions is you're setting up parameters, and you're like, okay, this is where the parameter is, but that is not the end all be all. That is the mechanism for control that you have to get a hold of in some way, shape, or form. The range you have to grab, so to speak. After you get some sort of semblance of balance going on here, you're going to have to go back to the universities. You're gonna have to infiltrate the universities.
Yep.
Because that's how it all went sideways.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying, is because like first the students are indoctrinated there, and then when they get into the workforce, they apply that ideology to their job, and that's how you get Bud Light and whatever. And
I think right now the important thing, at least from my perspective, is to just put a red line in the sand and stop the motion. Once you stop them, well, I think it is a matter of individuals that think like you and I think, acting on a individual level. And it's like that you can't save anyone until you've accepted salvation for yourself, right? Like you're no good to the Orthodox Church with secular thinking, right? And so in order to engage into the Orthodox Church, you have to individually transform. And you're not going to make any bigger changes on the world at large until you transform yourself. So you have to get control of yourself. And think about it. If 100 million people got control of their own finances, how things would just come to a halt.
Interesting. So by control of their own finances, though, like You mean just like divested from BlackRock or like?
Well, I mean, being aware of where your money is invested, where it's coming from, where it's going, who's holding it. You have to be very aware, right? Like I said, I use a local credit union now, and I just went fully local credit union because it's like, okay, they're fully local. Like all their financing comes from the local community. And
Okay,
so
yeah.
it's like, all right, well, it doesn't mean that they're being targeted. I mean, I've read stories over the last year where credit unions and small banks and local banks are begging the government to stop ESG because what it's doing, it's putting them in a situation where it's making them insolvent, and these larger banks are buying them up and swallowing them.
Wow.
And so it's another form of regulatory capture.
Yep.
But they're not using the federal government to regulate. They're utilizing the hive mind of social media to regulate now.
Right. Yeah.
John Robb does a lot of good work on this hive mind mentality that we see around us, and how the hive mind that we see like on Twitter or on Facebook or on these social media apps are actually quite a minority of the actual people that live in the United States, but they're utilizing the art of war in order to push their agenda onto everybody else. And most people are just going through their days. They're not thinking about these things. You know, it's one of the hardest things, especially getting through to a libertarian. It's like you cannot speak this high language, this high society language, and expect the average person to understand what the hell you're talking about. They don't think about these things on a daily basis. That's why it's the reason I attack this subject the way I attack this subject.
Yeah. And it's like, I think it's funny too, because I was thinking about during like COVID, how you couldn't ignore politics. It was like this totalitarian, event going on, and like average people were having to make what I saw as like political decisions. Do I wear the mask or not wear the mask or get the vaccine, whatever? Like, and everything was just so hyper politicized, and I was like, that's bad. Like, I think the average person should be able to go about their day and not have to think about politics because they're not equipped to piece through it all and like handle it. But
most people are completely unaware that their lives have been infiltrated by politics.
Oh, exactly. Yes, that's exactly my point. And especially during 2020, I was like, that people didn't even see how that was all politics. Yeah. I mean, I saw the whole thing as well as spiritual war, but it was also political, and because they're like this, they're kind of the same thing.
Right.
And people didn't even see it, and I was like, this is a totalitarian regime that we're dealing with, but you don't even see it. You're just like, oh, there's a global illness, right? And it's like, that's not what's going on here. And it should be that the average person can just kind of ignore politics. This is also why it's so terrible that corporations are now feeling like they need to take a stance on social issues, right, through this whole financial system, whatever their incentive is. The fact that they're doing it is because then the average person can't ignore all this stuff and just like live a happy life. Because I think the average person, like, I don't know, if you have good elites, the average person shouldn't have to think that much about politics, but we have bad elites. And then this stuff is just infiltrating everything. I don't know if you saw, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal by somebody who says they helped make corporations woke and they regret it. It's not a very long article. And
I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it has some like stats in it where they did polling, and it's like 63% of Americans think corporations shouldn't take a stand on political and social issues, right? But like you said, and then like but meanwhile 63%, I think it was like the same number of corporate executives think that you should. And I think you've kind of pulled back the veil of like, well, why are they thinking that, right? Because and you're right, it's because the people are the product now, and they're not. That's not who the corporations are serving, or like serving these financial entities, right?
Right.
Because it's puzzling. I think people, you got your average like whatever boomer or whatever, and they're like, turning on their TV and all the ads are really woke and there's like transgender people on everything. And it's like, what is going, like,
Yeah,
why?
and you pull back the curtain and you're like, yeah, this started in 2004.
Yeah, and
people
it's
are
like,
like,
what
what?
changed? Like, why? And I remember even before I knew about ESG, I was like, okay, so is this organic? Like, is this just my generation being indoctrinated in universities and then getting into the corporations and then just from the bottom up impressing their woke values upon the companies that they now work for? The young women in the marketing department, this and that, just think they're doing a social good. And since they have this like radical spirit, they are now applying that radical spirit to every aspect of their life. So if I'm a marketing executive at Pepsi and I'm woke, I think it's my duty to change the world and to make the world a better place. How do I do that? What is my sphere of influence? Well, I could pitch an ad campaign that is XYZ woke thing, right? And I'm doing good through Pepsi, right? Through my corporate job. Now I'm doing good and I feel better about myself and I can sleep at night. And I thought that was mostly what was going on, that it was just like woke people in these companies, like thinking that they're doing good and not understanding that they're doing bad and just pushing stuff along. But then this financial piece, this like ESG thing kind of drives a wrench in that thought. And it reveals an additional incentive that is driving this culture, this like corporate culture.
Well, what you find out when you start really like digging in to the background of all civil rights movements in the United States, you find out they were all corporately like financed.
Interesting.
And
not surprising.
Like, yeah. Like I just interviewed Rachel Wilson a couple of weeks ago about her book. I have it sitting right here. It's called Occult Feminism: The Secret History of Women's Liberation. And she talks a lot about the finance. I think her second book that she's coming out with is about the financial structure that was driving the feminist movement, and how it was something like 80% of women wanted nothing to do with it. They were like,
yeah,
what is this crap? I don't want this.
Yep. And now everybody's bought it, and so to speak.
Yeah, we're all suffering the consequences of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've been meaning to read that book actually, as a former feminist. But that was another thing. Whenever I was like a professional leftist, I was like, wait a minute, if we're the radicals or whatever, if we're like the ones who are against power or corrupt power, why are we the power? We are the power. Like, well, everybody in every corporation agrees with me as a leftist. So
you can dive into that book, and it's a big book, man. It's a deep dive.
Really?
Tragedy and Hope. That one. If you dive into that one, you find out that every revolution was financed by bankers.
I don't know that book. That's interesting. Yeah. So
Jay Dyer, for interest's sake, Jay Dyer did I think he did it was like an 8 or 10 part lecture series on the book. So you don't have to read the book. He breaks it all down for you.
Yeah.
He read all 2,000 pages and does like an 8-part lecture series on it. And it's not a book. I've listened to the book that did the summary on it called Tragedy and Hope 101. And it was dull. I was like, I can't imagine how dull the original was.
So I need someone to summarize it. It's interesting. It's and it's just how, I don't know. It makes you think, because this stuff is so at odds with what's actually good for people, but it's good for capital, right? So it's almost
power.
Yeah, it almost makes me do my, I don't know, my horseshoe theory back to
No, I understand. Well, it's I heard somebody say the other day, I can't remember who it was. I think it was David Patrick Harry. I heard him say, he was like, hey, look, man, capitalism and communism are two sides of the same coin. We shouldn't be looking at either one of them as the solution. Right. Where the system should be secondary to the culture of Christianity.
Yeah.
Problem is, and this is I'll be recording this episode this weekend with Dissident Mama. Is the problem is that we've allowed culture to shape the church instead of church to shape the culture.
Yep, absolutely. You see this all the time when you drive in a city and you see the rainbow flags on churches and whatever,
Yeah.
It's very clear. And you'll hear people say, I grew up hearing people say the church needs to be updated with the times. The church needs to get with the times. Like, that was something I heard people older than me say a lot about, like, the Catholic Church. And little did they know it had already changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And now I just reject that totally. It's like, no, like, God is constant and unchanging, and the times are changing, but we don't want to mold ourselves to the world, right?
Well, and how much are the times changing? Really, when you look at it, we're suffering the same consequences and the same, sins and depravity that was going on, during the time of Noah.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, that's true. It's like, there is, what does Ecclesiastes say? There's like nothing. Wait,
there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, it's true. That was a big part of me coming to Christianity too, because I was starting to look around and see things. I'd go, Christians always talked about this, huh? They always said that. Oh, there was a reason for that. Like,
I called my buddy Pete. I know Bucks talked to you about Pete Quinones. I called him in March of 2020, and I go, "Hey, dude, I'm agnostic," and he's like, "Yeah." I said, "Why does this look like Revelation?"
Whoa!
But I grew up Baptist, so I was all about, like, tribulation, and I was freaking out for a minute there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was like a big deal to me. I was like, hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on one second, brother.
Did
We're about
that
to enter 1,000 years of hell.
Did that get you interested in Christianity again?
That's what got me. That just idea, just looking around going, I live out in the middle of nowhere, and I was a over the road truck driver at the time. I didn't have a lot of interaction with people other than podcasting. And I was only podcasting on things I was interested in. And so once I saw like state troopers sitting at the Louisiana-Texas border and checking all the cars coming into Texas from Louisiana, I was like, what the fuck is happening? This makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
So it just, and then, like I said, I read that H.G. Wells trilogy. I don't have the book right here. It's over on this other side. On politics, and what he was talking about, creating a scientific religion in order to incorporate everybody under one religion. Wow. Therefore, they could create one culture that would span the globe and create a one world government. I was like,
yep.
Hold on one second, man. I'm seeing this right now.
Okay. Yeah, crazy how, I had come out of my this is crazy how much like the goings on of the world like influence your openness to Christianity. Because for me, it was living in San Francisco that made me go, something's up. Like, this is so dystopian. Like, I was seeing this like rot and decay that I don't think a lot of people saw until COVID happened. But for me, it was like 2 years before that I started being like, whoa, this is stuff Christians always talked about. There's like so much moral decay. Like, there's, and the breaking down of boundaries, right? In San Francisco, it's really like the sexual culture, the like everyone's polyamorous.
It has been for a long time.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that is fair. But I started to see it even spreading into like places it hadn't been. Like, I don't know that like heterosexual people used to be so into like open relationships and polyamory. That was like gay culture, right? And so now it was spreading, and then it was spreading to different cities. Like, I'd talk to my friends in DC or like Atlanta or like whatever, and they also knew a bunch of like poly people in open, or men who wanted open relationships or whatever. And I was like, something's really wrong here. This didn't used to be like how it was. And it's geographic. It was geographic for spreading, but into certain geographic areas. And then COVID, and that was like totalizing. It was just all of a sudden like the crazy was everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, that
Yeah.
like fear-based culture, and I don't know.
And
Breaking-
I've never lived my life in fear. That's just not how I've ever lived my life. I mean, there are things I'm sure I'm scared of. I know that there are things I'm scared of, but it was never I never focused or concentrated on these things. And what I saw well, this is actually personal. I don't think I've ever talked about this on the podcast. Something I saw that was taking place was I was seeing my grandma everywhere. So my grandma would refuse to leave the house because it might rain, and she was afraid of the weather.
Oh.
And she would sit in front of her television for hours watching the Weather Channel.
Wow.
And so I'm seeing people around me act like, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like, this isn't real.
Yeah. and like the crazy thing that what I was noticing, it was like, look at what kind of world we manifest when we're all serving our fear and making every decision based on our fear instead of making every decision based on faith. That like we manifest hell. That's what we manifest when we are afraid of death and serve our fear. We're just serving fear. Every decision everybody was making around me was just in service to fear.
Yes.
And it was hell. And I was like, you know, like I was already a Christian by then, but boy, did that just drive it home.
Just drove it home for you. Yes.
Yeah. Just, yeah.
All right. So we've been going almost an hour. I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to cover one more subject before we jump off here.
Okay.
All right. Were you ever woke?
Yes.
How woke were you?
I was not as woke as, I don't think I was ever as woke as what we're seeing now, but like, it's hard to kind of define it. Like,
you were
I
like
was
2019 woke or?
No, I was like 2010 woke. Like when I was in college, I was woke.
So did you see racists everywhere?
Yes.
Yeah.
Saw racists everywhere. I saw sexism everywhere. Everywhere. I saw sexism. And, you know, granted, I think misogynists exist. I've spent enough time on the right now to be like, okay, some of you actually do hate women. But sexism, as like the left defines it, is often just like biological realities that we just need to accept. So I saw sexism and racism everywhere, and I was very vocal about homophobia, xenophobia. I was like all about all that. Right.
All right. I'm not afraid of any of these people. They just need to leave me alone.
Yeah. I just didn't understand like cultural.
Leave the kids alone, especially. It's not even just me. Leave the kids alone. Like that was always my thing. It wasn't until people started jacking with kids that I was like, wait a minute, man.
Yeah.
I'll fight you.
Oh, the drag queen story hour thing was a big piece of my like red pilling too. Because I was like, this is clearly.
Walk us through your revelation and what broke the woke.
Okay, I'll give you a great example. It was a lot of things, but one thing was contemplating my own lineage, because I'm Italian and I come and on both sides of my family, I'm like very Italian, and my grandfathers were rural coal miners. We weren't rich, right? And their parents were poor people in Italy.
At one point, y'all were considered black.
And yes, so when my mother was a baby, she was so dark that the women in the grocery store would make comments to my grandmother because they thought she had like, you know, a black baby or I don't know, whatever, an ethnic baby, and they didn't like it. And I was just always aware that my family was like darker than other people, and that like meant something. And also we weren't rich, and my ancestors had like sacrificed and worked hard for me to be able to be where I was. And I was like, wait a minute, what white privilege? Like, what do you mean white privilege? And I'm from rural Appalachia, where even the non-Italians, so the English and the Germans and the Polish and whatever, are poor white people that like come to the Rust Belt, and the white privilege thing just dies. It's just like, it doesn't make any sense. these are not people who are just more privileged because of their skin color. A lot of these people are struggling economically, and it's just a lie. So thinking about where I'm from just started to break it all down. And I was like, no, like this doesn't, like you're actually insulting my ancestors and saying that they are like some form of oppressor when actually they were just like impoverished Italian American immigrants, like trying to make a living. So
Right.
screw you. You know, like it just started, that was a big thing. And then, so it's like the woke, like religion has these different tenets, right? It's like sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, racism, and they all have their like ideas as to why those things are big problems in our culture. I could do like a 2-hour podcast just breaking down how I started thinking differently on all of those things. Just the sexism one, like things that the left calls sexism, I was just like, no, that's like biological reality that we're not going to get around, right? Stuff like that. So just like looking at reality and admitting reality, and I just like, it really was that I just needed to accept reality to undo the woke thing, because it just wants to impart its own vision of reality that is antithetical to like
it's an inversion
what's
of
natural.
reality.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm not God. I just had to realize I'm not God, and I can't design everything. The world is a certain way, you know? Yeah, women are weaker than men. Sorry, I didn't design it. But I have to accept it, and then I have to make decisions based off of that. Like, I can't just cry about sexism and have it change. It's just the truth. So many things like that.
How long did it take you? Like, was it a slow process?
Yeah, it took years. I remember having like, years, and like conversations with various people and being exposed to different perspectives and meeting different people with different perspectives. Although I was largely in a bubble in San Francisco, I did have friends in like different parts of the country who would like challenge. There were always people online who would like challenge me on my feminism, and for a while I'd like ignore them, and then eventually I had a dance instructor she was a libertarian and she was not a feminist, and she would sit me down and like ask me questions about my feminism, and I started to realize I didn't have good answers for a lot of her questions. So just like Socratic method, I guess, just having someone, and I loved her and cared about her, so it wasn't hostile. I think that's a problem with the internet, is like when you're debating people online, it's like you don't see the humanity of the person and you don't love that person, so you're not going to change. You're just going to dig your heels in more. But I loved her, and she loved me, and like it didn't, and so that allowed me to like actually like honestly examine my beliefs, like because the challenge was coming from a place of love, and I didn't feel like someone was just attacking me or threatening me.
How did you end up in San Francisco from were you originally from Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So I went to Penn State for university, and then I stayed there for a year after and just worked a remote job. And I really wanted to leave Pennsylvania. I just had this like depression, and I just felt like I had questions about the world. And I needed to explore the world and just go somewhere else. I'd been in Pennsylvania my whole life.
Should have been a truck driver.
Yeah. Well, so I applied for a bunch of jobs, and one of them was in Redwood City, California, and I didn't even know what that was. And I was like, whatever, I just want to get out of here. I'll go anywhere, you know? And I couldn't figure out where to go. And they called me back, and that was the woke job. And and then I found out that was located just, 30 minutes south of San Francisco. So I moved to Redwood City and then eventually up to the city. So it was for a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm grateful because I learned a lot. Like it's really important that I went and did that. And like, I'm grateful to that company. And as much as I turned around and I don't really agree with what they're doing anymore, I had to go learn. So
yeah, no, that's cool. I was just curious.
Yeah.
My wife's been on quite a journey herself. She's from South Africa. She lived in England for 2 years, and now she's been in America for 6 years. So
wow.
There's people go on journeys. I was just curious. That was my own curiosity. I might even cut that on the podcast. I'm just
no, I think it's important because like as much as I believe it's good to like have loyalty to like your locale, or like I like localism, right? Like I think it's good to appreciate where you're from and like have your hometown roots and like all that. I appreciate all that, but you'll see people on Twitter making fun of people who travel, and I guess they're really criticizing sort of like consumerist travel, I guess. I don't know. But like for me, it was so important to go and live other places and experience different like something different, because then I could learn who I really was. Because like I learned who I really was almost like in opposition to like how screwed up San Francisco was.
Yeah.
So now I know my beliefs and morals like in a more firm way, because I experienced basically San Francisco's like the opposite of rural Pennsylvania, like culturally.
Right.
Although that's changing as they export their culture, and but that's a whole other thing.
Are you so you're back at your hometown?
Yeah, I came back here during COVID because I spent 6 months in New York, and then COVID hit. And I don't know if you recall that COVID was like, New York was like ground zero for COVID, and everybody there was so. I just came home for a weekend and never went back. Like I went back to get my stuff, and I was just like, I'd much rather be in rural Pennsylvania when all this crap is happening than in New York with all these neurotic people.
Oh, okay. So they didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't make you live in a nursing home or anything.
No, but like New York was like really hardcore, And I was even in like upstate
They were
New York,
wild.
like,
Yeah.
And I didn't like New York even before COVID happened. I just thought it was a more crowded, expensive Pennsylvania. So,
well, you know what they say in the Misesian economic structure: the more of something you have, the less it is valued, and the more people in an area, the less they are valued. And
wow, so yeah,
it really explains the high murder rates in cities.
Wow, that's so true. Because I've noticed that I could do a whole podcast on this. Living in a small community, you just have such a deep sense of care.
Everything slows down for you.
People care about you, and they want to help you.
I lived in Houston for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Now I live I have 9 acres. I live in the closest town to me is a town of 2,000 people.
The town I live in is 3,000. Yep.
Completely different. And
yep.
I'm originally from a little town called Moss Bluff outside of Lake Charles, Louisiana. Okay. We lived in Dallas. We lived in Houston. And all my summers, I just went and spent down in the country. And after graduating high school, the only thing I wanted to do was get out of the city.
Yep.
And it took me a long time. I mean, it did. It took me 20 years after graduating to get out of the city. But we got out here, and I'm like, I'm not going anywhere else.
No, I will never live in a city again. But it's so important to experience those two different environments. And I like to visit cities because they do have a lot of stuff that I like, culture and art.
Oh yeah, they're fun. They're interesting. But
the community aspect of a smaller place is just like unmatched, and it's really, it's just crazy. But it's hard because like I had to leave to earn money. There's no money here for young people.
That's why my parents drug me to Dallas, because there was
cities have the money.
No economy in.
There's no economy here.
Yeah.
Yep. There's no economy here, and the people who don't leave struggle financially their whole lives.
Yeah.
So,
but it's like my dad's told me before, there are things more important than money. So,
so true.
Sometimes it takes us a lifetime to learn some of these lessons. So,
yeah.
Well, I'm going to end the recording. You have any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
I don't think so. I don't even really have much to plug because I have a Substack.
Well, that was my next question. I haven't asked that yet.
Yeah. I don't have final thoughts except for that. So,
well, you have a Substack. What's your Substack?
It's called Mystic Sisters. It's with my twin. And
that's Amy, right? Is that her name?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's where I would tell people to find me, but I need to be better at actually podcasting on there. So
yeah, y'all have a podcast that's been inactive for almost as long as King Pilled.
Yeah. Yeah. This is why I'm using my AirPods. I need to get a mic, and
you sound fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, everything's done fine. There was no issues.
Okay, great.
I think you froze once, and that's probably my little country internet out here. So
that's funny.
So, all right, I'm going to end the recording.